and Linda Dillon.
Okay, and has any of them delegated their vote to anybody?
Linda has delegated her vote to you.
Okay, well that's fair enough. So listen, again, apologies folks. I got stuck in traffic and then when I eventually got here, my computer's playing up, so I'm on my phone, Emer. It's just in case anybody's trying to get through, I can't see them. Okay? Just to remind everybody that, as usual, if people want to indicate if they want to come in and speak, either if I can see you raise your hand or get Emer. So now we've got apologies from Linda and Jerry. Our draft minutes of the 23rd of June are page 5 of our meeting pack. Our members can tend to agree those minutes. Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, so the debate on the committee's draft motions to amend standing orders in relation to member statements is scheduled for Monday the 5th of July. And as usual, with just, members of this committee will be encouraged to contribute to that debate. As with most motions, it's for 90 minutes, so it's 10 minutes to move and 10 minutes to wind. So it's just to let people know. So the statement of entitlements for an official opposition, we're going to receive the briefing from Trevor Rainey. And just to remind us all that Trevor previously briefed our committee on his review of the statement of entitlements for an official opposition. And just he's coming back today to discuss any further implications. So page 12 of our meeting packs is a cover note for Emer, and in our tabled items is a letter from the Clerk. The report on the independent review and the slides provided by Trevor is here for today's briefing. So Trevor, without further ado, do you want to give your briefing to the committee? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, members. It's a pleasure to be with you again. I think, Emer, you kindly have my presentation set up to be shown on screen. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Chair and members, I spoke to you a few weeks ago about the review, and the review has now concluded. And yesterday I presented the final report to ARC committee, and they, as part of their work, will be inviting the Procedures Committee and also the Assembly Commission to input to their consideration of the report. So what I wanted to do today, and I appreciate, Chair, you haven't had much time to look at the report if you've only received it late yesterday, but I wanted to give you an overview of the report, particularly the findings and conclusions of the review, and also the recommendations which relate particularly to the work of Procedures Committee or are allied to it. So, Emer, if you move to the next slide, please. Emer, can you move to the next slide?
Looks like we're all having technical difficulties today, Trevor.
Well, perhaps while Emer tries to solve the problems with my presentation, I'll keep on talking, Chair, if that would work. Just to remind members that the background to the review was in the NDNA agreement, and as part of that, there was a review of the entitlements for the official opposition to be provided. And then from that, recommendations, particularly around improvements to the financial provision for the official opposition. When you've had an opportunity to look through the report, you will see that there's some background work done in relation to identifying the role of an official opposition, identifying types of methods and tools that an official opposition has to exercise its function. And broadly, the role of the official opposition is to scrutinise the government of the day and to provide alternatives both in terms of government and policies for public service. You go to, that's the next slide, slide 3, thank you. You will see there, members, there's 13 parts to the report, and when you've had an opportunity to read that, you hopefully will see the flow through the research, the consultation that was undertaken with all the parties and independent members in the Assembly, and benchmarking work that was done against parliamentary institutions internationally, but primarily across the UK and Ireland, which were seen to be the most relevant for this review. And if you look to the next slide, Emer, please. The outcome of all of the work in relation to the consultation, the research, the benchmarking, took me to these findings and conclusions. And I'll run through these briefly because they set the scene then for the recommendations that I have made. In respect of the procedural entitlements, which are of most interest to this committee, I'm taking together the existing Statement of Entitlements along with the provisions of the 2016 Act. And in my view, they provide a sound basis for the work of an official opposition. I've made recommendations on a couple of points to enhance those or strengthen those arrangements, and I'll take you through those in a few moments. And in respect of the resource entitlements, or the finance or financial support for an official opposition, in my view, those are inadequate and relative to what's needed by an official opposition and relative to what's provided in other institutions. And I've made recommendations for their enhancement. And I've also made 2 other recommendations which are related to the entitlements and which will be of interest to this committee. Firstly, around the potential for the formation of political or technical groups within the Assembly. And secondly, around having more robust arrangements to ensure adequate access to information from the executive, from ministers and from the departments for the work of the official opposition, indeed the wider work of the Assembly. So those are the broad conclusions. And Chair, I'll take you through the recommendations, focusing on those which are of most interest to this committee. So if you could move to the next slide. Okay. Recommendation 1. Sorry, I heard some interruption. Okay. I'll carry on.
People put themselves on mute, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Recommendation 1 deals with just a principle which I have adopted as I have looked at the review, and I think there's merit in the Assembly adopting this principle to underpin consideration of the entitlements. And that is that the resources, profile and status provided for the official opposition should not of themselves be an incentive or a disincentive to opt for official opposition. So in other words, that the resources, the entitlements in terms of speaking rights and so on, would not be so generous as to of themselves be an incentive to opt for official opposition. But on the other hand, they should not be so limited as to be a disincentive for a party to opt for official opposition if that was, from a political point of view, what they were choosing to do. And that balance is what I've sought to adopt as I've gone through the rest of the report and made my recommendations. The second recommendation is around the entitlements to the official opposition being clearly codified so that they can avoid misinterpretations, contention or dispute in their implementation. And there have been examples in other institutions where entitlements are in perhaps gentlemen's agreements or in conventions which don't carry any weight if they are challenged. So I believe it would be appropriate to codify them, and many of those are appropriately codified in standing orders of the Assembly. And the third point that I'm making, or the third recommendation under these general group, is around reviewing the operation of any entitlements that are in place. When I was looking at the research and consultation phase, there was only a very short period of time when an official opposition was actually operating, 6 or 9 months, and that's not really long enough for a full assessment of the impact of those entitlements. So I'm recommending that after 2 years, suggesting that there would be a review to look back over those 2 years and see how effective or otherwise the entitlements have been. Next slide, Emer, please. And then recommendation number 4 again relates to how an official opposition which comprises of more than one party might operate, and that is possible under these entitlements and under the 2016 Act. That the parties involved should develop and publish operating procedures for how their grouping will work, and particularly in relation to the business of the Assembly, so that the Speaker's office, the business office and so on would know how speaking rights and speaking entitlements were being operated and so on. And I think it's important that such arrangements are in place at the beginning of the operation of an official opposition, and indeed that they would be a condition of the accessing funding under the FAP scheme. And then fifthly, and again this is something of importance for this committee, and that is my view that the standing orders needed for these recommendations, and indeed all of the recommendations, should be implemented in a timely manner and ideally be in place before the end of the current Assembly mandate. So that's a grouping of 5 general recommendations, and I want to move on to ones that are specifically on the procedural aspect of the entitlements. And recommendation 6 is looking at some of the existing speaking rights under the existing statement of entitlements around question time, priority of speaking in terms of executive business, ministerial statements, matters of the day, and opposition debates. And I consider these to be reasonable and that they should continue. One point I would make just in passing is around matters of the day, where the leader of the official opposition would have the first question after the first contribution after the member raising the matter. There's a little contradiction there in that matters of the day are not designed to be on executive or government business, and therefore there might be a question as to whether the opposition is needed to contribute to that debate if it's not specifically on executive business. But I didn't think it was a significant enough point to make any recommendations. Overall, those provisions, I think, are sound and should continue. Recommendation 7 is an additional point in relation to question time, and that is that the official opposition should have the first question to each minister under the oral table questions. That will be the case for each minister, so that the leader of the opposition or whoever is designated by the leader of the opposition would ask that first question. And questioning like that is common in other parliamentary institutions, and I think would strengthen the official opposition's role. Next slide, please, Emer. And then recommendation 8 deals with the 2016 Act. And I've said in my conclusions that the Statement of Entitlements, along with the 2016 Act, provide a sound basis. And there are a number of elements within the 2016 Act which require standing orders to be made. And it would be my recommendation that we would proceed, or the Assembly would proceed, to move and implement those recommendations and those standing orders. I think it's fair to say that between the 2016 Act and the Statement of Entitlements, there are many similarities. There are a few significant differences. For example, the 2016 Act requires that the chair of the Public Accounts Committee would be from the opposition, and that is a situation which is common in all other parliamentary institutions. And while it's not in the current Statement of Entitlements, taken together with the 2016 Act, I think, for example, that would be a very useful way of strengthening the official opposition and its role. Next slide, Emer, please. And then recommendation 9, it links really with recommendation 4. And it's really about ensuring that where there's more than one party in an official opposition, that they adopt the principle that's within the current Statement of Entitlements of sharing the speaking rights on the basis of party strength. And I think that is worthy of continuing. And then it would link into recommendation 4 and having operating procedures written down and published. Next slide, Emer. And then in relation to committees, I'm making a recommendation, one which probably would only be applicable in very limited circumstances, and that is that the official opposition would have the opportunity to be represented in all statutory committees. It's technically possible that the size of the official opposition might enable a party to be qualifying for official opposition status, but not large enough to have a representative on every committee, or indeed if the number of statutory committees would change in the future for any reason. I think this principle is worthy of putting in place. And then recommendation 11 relates to political or technical groups. And in 3 of the 4 comparator parliaments that I've identified within the report, there are provisions to recognise political or technical groups that in those parliamentary institutions is seen to be part of strengthening the scrutiny of government, strengthening the operation of the parliament. And I think that's worthy of further consideration in developing thinking around that. I think there are some challenges in developing that, but I think it is worthy of consideration and further exploration of those examples in the other parliaments which are referred to in the report. Next slide, Emer. I'll not dwell on these, Chair, but you will see in the report recommendations 12 to 17 relate to the FAP scheme, or the Financial Assistance to Political Parties scheme. Members will be able to read that and see the recommendations there, which are largely around increasing and enhancing the financial assistance to opposition parties and some conditions of use and of the funding and how that operates in practice. These are matters for the Assembly Commission. Happy to take questions on them, but I'll not delay the committee today in talking about those matters. If I go to the final recommendation, which is around access to information, and this was something that came up quite strongly in the consultation with parties and independent members, the difficulty of receiving information and having sufficient information and briefings to enable the official opposition, or indeed the Assembly more generally, to challenge and to question and to scrutinise the work of government. There are quoted in my report a couple of examples where, for example, in Westminster, there's a Cabinet Office protocol about sharing information with the opposition, and I've referred to that in the report. Whether through protocols or indeed standing orders or legislation or a combination of these, I think there's merit in exploring and adopting a more robust approach to the provision of information from ministers and departments to the Assembly, and in particular in this report, the official opposition. Chair, that is a very quick run through the report and its recommendations. Now, again, I appreciate members have not had time to study the report, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the report and the recommendations which I've made to AARC. And I'm happy, Chair, to clarify anything or to take any questions at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. I mean, it is a very detailed briefing. And before going to ask any members to have questions, I just want to remind people that there's a lot of information in this. So if we could just be careful, make sure that it's not, forwarded or passed around because it's yet to be developed. So do members have any questions? Not yet, Trevor, but I doubt.
Please.
Who is it? William? Yeah, go ahead.
Trevor, in the caption that you showed, findings and conclusions,
Yes.
we talked about political and technical groups.
Yeah.
Can you put some meat on the bones? What does that mean, really, if you're comparing it to Westminster, for example?
Yeah, I mentioned that 3 of the 4 comparative parliaments that I used for comparison, which were Westminster, House of Commons, the Dáil in Dublin, and the Scottish and Welsh parliaments. So those were the 4 primary comparators. 3 of them recognise technical groups or political groups. Westminster doesn't. But the Dáil, Scotland and Wales, and looking at a devolved institution, Scotland and Wales perhaps are the closest comparators, and they do recognise the formation of political groups. The Dáil recognises technical groups, as they describe them there. Each parliament has slightly different criteria in terms of the number of members that can comprise a political or technical group, and they have slightly varying entitlements that they give to those groupings. I think in that regard, I have not made a specific recommendation that the Assembly move to this. What I've recommended is that it be explored further, because I think there's value in it, but there are certain challenges with it, and you would have to look carefully at how it might work within the context of the Northern Ireland Assembly. But those three institutions provide good models for further work and further consideration. And I think what I have seen in those parliaments indicates that they have been a useful tool within the parliamentary institution, developing and strengthening its activities and its scrutiny of government. So a recommendation to further explore rather than a recommendation to move straight to that particular option.
But what does that mean in real terms? I mean, when you talk about Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland, political groups, what is a political group in the context of those three administrations? And
you'll see in the report when you look at the detail of it, there's certain threshold. For example, 5 members is often used as the threshold. So 2 parties or a party and a number of independents who come together formally into a grouping that reaches a threshold, say 5 members, would then be in those parliaments recognised as a group. In one parliament, for example, that grouping then would have a seat on the business committee and certain priorities and allocated speaking rights. So those are provisions in those places. In the Northern Ireland context, and this is where further work would need to be done if this was to be taken forward, if you're looking at the official opposition, a technical group or a political group that would be recognised as official opposition would have to reach the thresholds within the Northern Ireland Assembly. So there are 2 thresholds in the mix. One is a party which declines ministerial position. That would not be relevant to a political or technical group. But the provision in the 2016 Act of 8% of the members of the Assembly is a threshold. Now, that would work currently at 8 members. So a grouping of 8 members, be they from 2 political parties or a political party and 2 independents or whatever mix, coming together would then cross the threshold of recognition as part of the official opposition. That's the threshold that you would look at here in the Assembly. So I'm not making a recommendation that that be done. I'm making a recommendation that that be explored further and look at how it could be constructed within the Northern Ireland Assembly context and the pros and cons of that. But sufficient from what I've seen in other places that it merits, in my view, further consideration.
Okay, thank you. Trevor, are you done, William?
Just one quick one, please, Chair.
Yeah.
So, Trevor, in terms of what is the difference then between those 3 institutions and what you have described as political, and the House of Commons where you've described them as technical? What's the difference? Are they essentially the same thing, but just with different names, or is there a tangible difference?
In essence, there's no difference. It's just difference of terminology.
Right.
In the Dáil, they call them technical groups. In the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, or the Welsh Parliament as it now is, they're called political groups. But in essence, it's a group of members that meet certain criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sinead, would you like to come in?
Yeah. Sorry, just one quick question. My computer's slow to respond here. Trevor, just wondered, in your recommendations, the piece about information and timely access to information interests me particularly. And I know there that you referred to protocols and, exploring the possibilities of maybe pinning this down into standing orders. But I wondered, had you given any thought to question time, because question time is one of the key moments where people do have an opportunity to maybe access or get try to get access to information. And I'm wondering then, in the situation where there may be more than one party that forms the official opposition, I think you're recommending that they would get the first question at question time. And I'm just wondering if it was more than one party, and given that that tool is so precious in accessing information, had you considered that they would get perhaps maybe the second question also, just so both parties would have an opportunity?
I mean, I think it's very difficult to foresee all the scenarios that there might be in terms of the official opposition, because it could comprise of three parties or in the future as well. So it's difficult to sort of cover every scenario, and equally so to do that in standing orders. I think what you'll find in the statement of entitlements currently is that the first supplementary for the first three questions is for the official opposition. What I'm recommending is that the first question should be for the official opposition, and then taking those two provisions together, the second and third sub questions, the first supplementary would be from the official opposition. I think the issue of more than one party means that they have to work out their way of sharing how they have their speaking rights, and that's part of the other recommendations. So I think I am content the first question from the official opposition would be sufficient, and it may be if there are two parties they have to alternate it, or if they're, the scale is different, they might work up an arrangement of 2 out of 3 for one party, 1 out of 3 for that. But that would be for them to work out a proportional approach depending on their size.
Okay, Sinead.
Thank you. Thanks, Trevor.
Okay.
No bother. Or anyone else indicate they want to speak?
Joanne has her hand raised.
Okay, go ahead, Joanne.
Yes, please, Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
I almost unmuted, so sorry for the disruption, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's a bit of a lag.
Hello, Chairman.
Joanne. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry for the disruption. We're having real trouble at the back of the building connecting. My question is with regard to follows up time and speaking in general, because when we're all here as members of the party, we're all here as individual members also. And already the procedures to some extent disadvantages from third parties. So it's just to understand in what way, Trevor, you can balance affording the opposition time, but also ensuring that those members you said on the back benches and the parties are also afforded an opportunity on the to ask questions and contribute to debates and so on. How are you going to ensure the right balance is struck in that regard?
Joanne, you broke up there quite a lot. I don't know if, Trevor, you got all that.
I think, Chair, I caught enough perhaps to answer the question, which is really about the balance between the official opposition and the work of a backbencher on the executive side.
Sorry, Trevor. Joanne, was that the question you were asking? I think it was, Trevor. I just want to make sure.
I think there's a thumbs up there, so we'll take that as being there. Yeah, I mean, what's recommended here and what's in the Statement of Entitlements and the 2016 Act are tweaks to the existing system of d'hondt allocation or proportional allocation of speaking rights within the Assembly. And obviously within that, the executive parties obviously have their d'hondt or proportional allocation and receive the opportunity for their backbenchers to contribute to debates and ask questions in that way. So I think what's proposed here is at a level which leaves the position of backbenchers on executive parties or government parties with still a significant opportunity to contribute. So I think the balance in what's there and what I'm recommending is about right on that. But there is, and I've commented in the report, there is a very much an opposition in inverted commas rule by the backbenchers signatures and scrutinising, particularly other parties within a 5-party mandatory coalition. So that is not, I hope, diminished in this, but I've recognised that in the report as well.
Joanne, does that cover your question?
It does, Chairman. Thanks. I disagree to some extent because already the way things work out, there's considerable time afforded to those in much smaller parties that detrimentally affects those in the larger parties. So I'm not clear if the balance is right as it currently sits. Yeah. So to take that forward, and then I think it's going to put backbenchers in the larger parties in an even worse position.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think it's one of those we're going to have to just take this out as we go along, and it'll be in Trevor's further recommendations. Emer, is there anyone else?
There's no other hands raised at present, Carol.
Okay, Trevor, on behalf of the committee, I just want to thank you. I just want to remind people again that Trevor's report does contain a lot of personal information that hasn't been redacted yet. But when it is redacted, and I think, Emer, a redacted copy of the report needs to come. I'm not sure what needs to be redacted, so I want to have a discussion about that. Because at the end of the day, I don't see any Data Protection Act breaches, but I'll let you come forward with a draft redacted report, and then we'll take it to committee. So, Trevor, thank you again, and we look forward to further development of this work.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, and I wish you well with your deliberations. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good summer.
Yeah, you too, Trevor. Thank you.
Thank you now. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, so Ministers' Elections and Petitions of Concern, Bill Emer's paper, and you'll be aware that this is currently going through Westminster Parliament. And the bill aims to implement aspects of NDNA which relate to, for example, reforms to the sustainability of devolved institutions, also the reform of the Petition of Concern mechanism, and also updating the Ministerial Code of Conduct. And as accepted matters, none of these aspects of NDNA can be legislated for within the Assembly, so do require legislation at Westminster. So just by way of update, the bill is currently at committee stage. And once it's gone through its Lord stage and its final stages, there will inevitably be a number of actions for our committee in relation to any standing orders, which will the committee will undoubtedly need the action before the end of this mandate. And at page 25 of our packs, Emer's provided a memo which provides further information on each aspect of the bill. So do any members have any questions at this stage? No, Emer?
No hands raised, Carol.
Okay. So, I mean, there's a lot of information in Emer's memo anyhow. So an update on the progress of the bill and the next steps will be brought by Emer to an early meeting of our committee in the autumn. So we just content to note and update the memo accordingly. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. There's no items of correspondence on our forward work programme. I just want to refer you to the draft forward work programme at page 61 of our packs. So again, just in keeping with everything else, we just content to agree our forward work programme. Is that agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, so we're moving into the recess period and we may still receive Freedom of Information requests, which should be responded to within 20 working days. So I just want to ask if the committee is content for myself and Tom to enable either or both if available, or one in absence of the other, to consider non-routine or contentious FOI. But either way, whatever the FOI request is, as long as it's done within 20 days, so are people content that Tom and I deal with those in absence of the committee in recess?
Great.
Yes, content.
Thank you. I don't have any other items of any other business. Does anyone else have any?
No.
It was remiss of me at the start because of just having huge technical problems. So I want to welcome William and Joanne to the committee. Emer, is anyone else there? Because I can't see on the screen.
In the meeting currently, there's yourself, Rosemary, William, Nicola, Sinead, Tom, and Joanne.
Yes, but it was really William and Joanne as new members of the committee. I just wanted to say a welcome to them. So the time and date. So I'm assuming there's no other members have any issues they want to raise under. No, okay. Under AOB. So the date and the time for the next meeting is Wednesday, the 15th of September at 2:30. So just want to wish us all well, enjoy your summer, and continue to stay safe. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Chair.
Committee Room 29.